And we're back. I'm your host, BKP. Good morning from the office, North Georgia's only live online morning show. And next up, our guest. We're doing a series, and we've invited all of the candidates, Republican candidates, for governor in the primary, Georgia State, in Georgia, to be on our show. And my next guest is Republican State Senator, District 6. Hunter Hill, and Senator Hill is a candidate for governor of Georgia. Are you with us there, Senator Hill?
I am, Brian. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
Well, good morning and welcome to North Georgia and welcome across the state. We're proud to say that considering we're on the internet, we have statewide viewers. But welcome to North Georgia up here in the mountains, and we want to invite you up to be in the studio at any time. We invite all candidates. We've got a list here this morning of your website. I went through your website and I looked at several things on your site as far as your positions. But I'd like to start out with this particular one. Just recently, last week, the Georgia Sheriff's Association had their summer retreat over at Lake Lanier, and everybody got an opportunity to address them. Did you get an opportunity to address the Sheriff's Association? Were you over there, and did you address them?
No, I was not able to be there, but go ahead.
Well, I thought, and I'm sorry for that. I thought all the candidates were invited and had an opportunity to address them. I know. I thought that was the case, so my apology, because that's what I was told by them. But recently, one of the debates that is going on in this campaign that has surfaced to the top for now is minimum wage pay, a mandate of minimum wage pay for cops and deputies. And it seems like all the candidates, I'll say that tongue-in-cheek, are rushing to get in this debate and make their position. What is your position on that particular issue?
Well, first of all, law enforcement is they're just special. You know, they're husbands and fathers. They are wives and mothers, and they come home every day, we hope, and we need to provide them the protection, the force protection, and the resources they need to do their job. And if their state needs to help with that, I'm happy to enter into that debate. And I was proud to support a pay increase for state law enforcement officers. But, I also believe in federalism. I'm a constitutional conservative, and we don't like it when the federal government makes us do things as a state. And so I also don't like to make local governments do things that are not already in their budget. That's what we call an unfunded mandate. And so there's two things that I'd say here. Number one, we did what was right by our state law enforcement, and we have created a demand, in the local law enforcement to say, hey, look, if I can go and be a state law enforcement officer, I can make X more dollars, and it's putting pressure on local law enforcement. Well, boards of commissioners and mayors need to do the right thing and step up and make sure their local law enforcement are funded, but I don't think the state should force them to, because all these different communities around the state are different. They have different needs and pressures, and they should solve this problem at the local level. Secondly, the state has potentially, I've talked to a lot of law enforcement, put unfunded mandates already on local law enforcement, and so we need to look at drawing some of those back. And if we're forcing local law enforcement to do something that would otherwise be a state function, then we need to compensate them for that.
Let me stay in that direction for a minute, because when you bring up unfunded mandates, and I have said this to several candidates, Senator Hill, that if some of the candidates would go and sit down, and I understand right now you got to do fundraising, I understand all that and how it works and how you got to get enough money to run the race, okay, that you're in. So I have no problem with that. But I say if the candidates would go and sit down outside of Atlanta with some rural county commission chairs and say, what is really what do you find as some of the biggest problems you deal with on a daily basis? In my words, I have heard them and hear some of these commission chairs say state unfunded mandates. I mean, is that something, if elected, and I'm just going that other direction, that you think we should seriously take a look at down under the Gold Dome as the unfunded mandates that get sent to these counties?
Absolutely, Brian. And let me just back up. I mean, I'm a constitutional conservative and want to drive in why I'm even doing this. I believe in the foundational constitutional principles of limited government, and we try to be a jack of all trades. Even at the state level of Georgia, we call ourselves a conservative state, but we spend billions of dollars on low return activities in our budget. And what it does is it forces us to starve the core competencies of government. And what are those core competencies? And I'm getting to my point about law enforcement. The three core competencies of government at the state level are public safety, education, and transportation. And so if we're going to fund those as priorities, then we wouldn't be having this debate, because we're wasting billions of dollars on so many other things, and we would be funding local law enforcement and state law enforcement to the levels that they should be funded at.
Okay, I want to get a couple of things in here in our short time. So moving to the next, eliminating state income tax. Okay. As governor, I will lead to eliminate the state income tax. If Tennessee, Florida, Texas can eliminate it, so can Georgia. How do you get there? How do you get there, Senator? How do you get to eliminating state income tax? What is your plan?
Well, there's a couple of things, and I think people need to understand why I want to do it. I mean, when I think of North Georgia, I think of a lot of times a border community with Tennessee, and there's no income tax. And so North Georgia is competing for jobs and economic activity with a very flourishing Chattanooga and other aspects of Tennessee. And so the same thing runs true on our southern border in Valdosta and Cairo and Thomasville, where they're bordered up against Florida, who has no income tax. So it's about economic development. It's about expanding our opportunity and individual growth opportunities for individuals. So eliminating the income tax is a big goal of mine. How you get there is, number one, you got to shore up the sales tax code. We've been shooting buckshot through it for years, offering exemptions, tax credits, tax breaks to individual industries. That's government picking winners and losers. I don't agree with it. We need to create a fair, flat tax that is spread across all of the people in the state in an even way, and stop taxing capital and investment and income. And that's going to help our economy grow. People are going to want to move here and grow their businesses here. So the answer to your question, though, is shoring up our sales tax code, our consumption tax, and potentially raising it a few points so that we can lower our income tax, so that we're empowering people with the choices of how am I going to be taxed. It's going to be based on how I spend my money, not on the lump sum of what I make.
So you're looking at consumption tax.
That's correct.
Versus, okay, another. We hear transportation, and when I say this, and I'm talking, and I understand, you know, you're running for the governor of Georgia. That's South Georgia, Atlanta, and the entire state. We're in North Georgia, and in North Georgia, we hear transportation over and over. Now, I'm very interested in, we can double our investment in transportation without raising taxes. Tell us how we do that, because obviously in Atlanta they told us a couple of years ago that it couldn't be done. How do you do that?
Career politicians are constantly justifying the legacy expenditures of government. What I mean by that is the way we've always done it. And so when Georgia was growing, when Atlanta was growing very much in the 70s, transportation was 15% of the budget. Okay, now it's 5%. So to me, justifying a tax increase for 5% of the budget is essentially justifying a tax increase for the 95% of the budget, all the other items in which we spend. Florida spends about 11% of their state budget every year on transportation. Again, Georgia's down to 5%. So we need to invest more in this core competency of government, and we can do it. When I showed up in the Senate in 2013, the state budget was $17 billion. This last budget cycle, it was $25 billion. So if we'd have just taken growth money alone, the money that, as a result of our economy growing and revenues increasing to the state, if we'd have just prioritized some of those monies towards transportation. In other words, if we'd have had the backbone and the spine and the leadership to focus on transportation in the budget, then we would not have had to raise taxes. And that's been my plan, and that is my plan going forward.
When you say we would not have had to raise taxes, did you vote for that transportation bill that did raise taxes?
No, I voted against it for final passage.
Okay, you have voted against that transportation tax. I know that was redundant, but I wanted to hear it twice. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Senator. I wanted to hear somebody say they voted no twice. I guess.
Go ahead.
So, no, you go ahead.
I voted against it. That's it.
Okay, that's it. Okay, but you feel, even voting against that, you felt at that time, and you feel now, that the state of Georgia can solve their transportation issues within the budget they're passing yearly?
Yes, I do. So the state portion of the funds that go to transportation is about $1.2 billion a year. We get more money from the feds as well for transportation. But if you heard, I said we went from 17 to 25, so we increased our budget by about $8 billion in the 5 years that I've been in the Senate. So the point I'm making is we could have easily doubled our investment in transportation if we'd have chosen to, and we would have had to make some hard decisions on cuts, but that's what the folks hire us to do. We shouldn't justify a tax increase. We have enough money. It's a spending problem. It's a choice of investment problem. It's not a revenue problem.
Let's go into some bureaucratic overreach, and we're going to talk about schools. And no child should be trapped in a failing school that undermines their future. I have led and will continue to lead efforts to provide more choice and opportunity for students. How do you plan to return local control? There's a couple of things here in education. What is your plan for failing schools? We saw the governor put on the ballot a failing school proposal that no pun intended, failed at the ballot box. The voters said no. And then there was some efforts last year. What do you propose on the failing schools? Let's go with that first in the state of Georgia.
Well, the reason it failed was because people saw really what it was. I mean, at the end of the day, it was we'll do it better, meaning this level of government, the state level of government will do it better than the local government. And so ultimately it was a governmental solution. And my proposal has been and will continue to be infusing the free market principle of competition in education. I believe if we empower people to make choices, the families, the parents of these children, they will choose wisely on behalf of their child. And how do you do that? You empower them with the resources that they're paying anyway to the government. So an education savings account would be the government portion of the money that would follow the child, the state portion of the money, and then that individual would be able to use it however they see fit for their child, whether it be online school, private school, traditional public school. And so what we need to realize that's going on is more government and us tinkering around the edges and trying to change this policy or that policy is never going to work. We're stifling innovation and leadership in the classroom. We're holding back leadership of our principals, which are the boots on the ground leaders in those buildings, in those schools. And we need to free up the system and allow for the free market principle of competition to elevate everyone's votes as it relates to education.
Let's stay on education just for a minute, because I'm not trying to summarize or your answer, Senator, but did I hear you basically say let the money follow the student? Is that somewhat what I heard in a way?
No, that is exactly what you heard. Is we have to empower families. We cannot expect the government to do everything and to be all things to all people. We've got to put here's another constitutional principle: individual responsibility. We've got to allow people to make choices, and I believe that the free market of ideas and opportunity will elevate the educational landscape in Georgia.
Okay, so that could also create a competitive atmosphere within your public school system. But then what do you do in the public school system when they say, hey, we have to compete if we have to keep the dollars in the public school system? But the bureaucratic overreach in Atlanta, where I'm not speaking for any particular superintendent and I'm not going there, but I know several superintendents of schools in these counties that a good portion of their job and their day is just reporting to Atlanta on so many different levels and not able to focus on their school system. Those are my words, but I watch it every day. So what do we do downtown Atlanta with the State Board of Education? Do we allow do we make those elected by congressional district? Or, I mean, what do we do downtown to return the control? You may have already answered that, but I want to come back to that a little bit. What do we do if public schools are going to start competing for the money if you're elected and that happens? What do we do to get that out of Atlanta and back to local control?
Well, again, there's no more local control than that family, than that individual, two parents making a choice for where they send their kids. So empowering families to make choice and giving them their resources back is local control at its best. Let me explain why I believe that the system is broken and why I believe that even Republicans are failing at offering reform solutions. It's because Title 20, which is the regulations in the law that governs education in the state, is thicker than the Bible. So trying to change that and come up with the right words, and that's why teachers are having to be so burdened in the classroom. They're constantly doing paperwork. They're not allowed to teach. The accountability that we're putting on teachers and principals is well-intended, like so many other government programs. We want to have accountability, but at the same time, they're not teaching. The principals are not able to enact discipline in the classroom because we're afraid we're going to hurt somebody's feelings. So my point is rather than change the intricate details of the law, I want to compete against it and allow for a school that's to be able to be stood up that's not currently there. If the parents are choosing, the parents will be the ultimate decision maker, the accountability measure. If you're not educating my child, I want to hold you accountable, right? And so if the parents are in control, I believe we'd be on the right path instead of putting bureaucrats in control.
I want you to put this into the exact words that you use on your website. You say that we're not I don't want to say you're not concerned, but what is the word you have here about we're not really under attack or have to worry about outside forces, attacking this country as much as we do internal forces that are right in front of our face that are happening concerning our Constitution. Now, I'm going around that. Do you know where I'm going with that?
Well, I do, Brian, because you're striking at exactly why I'm running for governor. I mean, I've led 5 different teams on 3 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was blessed with the opportunity to get to play Army football at West Point. But after my service to our country and having faced the enemies of our country, I can tell everybody that Islamic terrorism will never bring our country to its knees because we are too strong and they are too weak. But what will bring our country to its knees are weak politicians who undermine the constitutional values and principles that made our country great. And that's what fires me up every day, is to take that mindset and those broken philosophies of liberals that rule the day in our government, both nationally and at the state level. Because while we are a 2/3 majority in the Senate, Republican state Senate, and almost that much in the House, let me tell you, we are not doing enough to implement the conservative values that we all believe in into policy. I believe limited government is the best thing for our people, and so that's what I'm going to be fighting every day to implement. We need to be partnering with ministries, nonprofits, the business community, and private individuals and families to solve the social challenges that we face, because the government spends billions of dollars on it, and we fail and we fail and we fail. And so let's get our minds right. Let's elect a true conservative leader to invest in the core competencies of government and stop wasting our tax dollars.
Well, first of all, let me back up and say thank you for your service to this country and what you're telling me. And I just like to sum it up so I make sure I hear where you're going with this. So what you're telling me is after serving in Afghanistan and Iraq and several tours in these areas of the country, and then coming home and serving as a senator, strangely enough, the internal forces is what we need to really focus on. That is taking this country down on a daily basis. And those are my words, but am I hitting around the area there, Senator?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was an airborne ranger trained to close with and destroy the enemy. Yet in Afghanistan, I was being used in the nation-building capacity of winning the hearts and minds of the Afghans. And that was my first brush with understanding and experiencing firsthand the broken philosophies of a liberal mindset. I can't win over somebody when I have a helmet on my head and a gun in my hand. That's not the best use of the infantry. And so my point in saying that is our military is the best in the world. I'm so proud to have gotten to serve and to lead troops into combat. And we, by the way, we take orders. I saluted. I said, yes, sir. And we did an outstanding job in implementing the mission. But I knew that long term we were not going to deliver results. We were not going to make Afghans suddenly think, oh, yes, I believe in capitalism and freedom and liberty and Christian values. You know, that's not a smart thought that's going to ultimately result in policy. So I said, look, we have the best leaders in the world in our military. Where we lack leadership is on the policy making side, and that's the elected officials. And that's what inspired me to run for the state senate to begin with.
Going in another direction, you say you promise to sign any piece of legislation that further protects the lives of the unborn. Let me ask you a question. What kind of legislation would that be? What kind of legislation? You're in the Senate, so you see the legislation that. What legislation would you like to see? You would sign anything that protects, but what kind of legislation are you looking at? Can you describe some of that?
Yeah, I absolutely can, but let me back up to give your listeners a little bit of view into the why. I gave my life to the Lord in the 8th grade, and my Christian values coupled with my belief in our constitutional founding documents say that if we're going to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that starts with life. And as a Christian, life begins, in my belief, life begins at conception. And so if we're going to have a government that protects life, then we need to protect the innocent life of the unborn. And that's why I'm pro-life, and that's why I have that strong belief, because it's the meshing of my Christian values with constitutional principles. And so what does that look like? Before I came into the state Senate, it was illegal to have an abortion in Georgia after 26 weeks. Well, right before I came in, the legislature moved it down to 20 weeks. Okay? So if legislation that moves it in the direction closer to conception, I would sign that. Another thing is issues of how we spend our dollars. You know, we talk about healthcare and how many billions we spend on healthcare, and you know, I've already voted for, and it's the law of the land in Georgia, that we don't fund abortion in this state with taxpayer dollars. So that was an example of a pro-life bill that I signed. But continuing to change the mindset of Americans and push the agenda that if we are going to be a government that protects life, then we need to make sure we protect our most innocent life, and that's the life of the unborn.
You know, recently with Texas and North Carolina and Indiana and some of the pressure on governors concerning religious liberty, religious freedom bills, a couple years ago the governor had an opportunity to sign one and vetoed it. Would you have signed that bill? And as governor, would you send down, as far as your legislative package, when you meet, you have pre-meetings with the governor's office on some things that the governor would like to see come out of the session? Would you entertain bringing that back up? And is that something you would like to do?
I'm sorry, were you talking about religious liberty?
Yeah, would you have signed that bill that was on the governor's desk a couple of years ago? And also, I'm sorry for mangling up the question. Would you have signed that bill? And if elected, would you promote or ask the legislature to send one back to you to sign, knowing the controversy other governors have gone through?
Well, the short answer is yes. I've voted for that bill, religious liberty, 3 times. But again, let's back up and come back to the why. It's lost in translation because the liberal media tries to suggest that we're trying to discriminate against people. Well, let me just tell you, we're trying to make sure Christians and Jews and people of other faiths are not discriminated against. That's what religious liberty is about. It's a constitutional, foundational principle in our country that liberal judges have undermined through the years with their rulings. And so what we have to do is just restore religious liberty to its rightful place in the Constitution as a protected right. And it's a kind of a lawyerly conversation, but all constitutional rights are protected under the strict scrutiny standard, which means the government has to have a high bar to burden someone's liberty. Well, religious liberty is the only liberty in the Constitution that has been downgraded to a reasonable standard, which is a lower standard in our courts. So it's basically given lawyers and judges and the government the ability to undermine one's religious liberty, if they want to, at a lower standard. So we need to elevate the standard and restore it to its rightful constitutional protection. I would support it. It's good for business. It's good for the people of Georgia.
I only have a minute and a half, Senator, and let me ask you this. Obviously, every governor in the nation has to work with the federal government and the actual administration. Do you feel do you support the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and his administration, and you look forward to working with them, or is there anything out of that administration that concerns you?
One of the great blessings of the last year, was him winning. So absolutely, I support Donald Trump. I get very frustrated with the liberal media, as I'm quite sure all your listeners do, the way that they're trying to destroy him and encumber him at every turn, him and Vice President Pence. And they're making progress, even though they're being attacked at every turn.
Well, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I brought up Foxconn this morning, and I don't understand it was not the lead of everything. And Foxconn is the #1 manufacturer of Apple products. Tim Cook, their Apple CEO, and $10 billion investment, 13,000 jobs, and you got to look on page 6 to find the story. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think you understand what I'm saying.
No, I do, and we've got to support him. And what I'm looking forward to as governor is working with that administration to deal with these legacy issues that I think are broken in our government, where we're spending billions on low return activities and trying to fix healthcare so that we can actually increase health outcomes for people that are paying all this money for healthcare. So anyway, I'm looking forward to working with the Trump administration to solve these challenges.
30 seconds. Anything you want to finish with that you didn't get an opportunity to say this morning, Senator, to our viewers?
I appreciate it. I think we've covered a lot, and I think this is the first of many conversations. Brian, I really appreciate being invited on your show. And I'd ask your listeners to go visit votehunterhill.com and learn more about me and reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions. And I look forward to getting up into the studio in the coming months.
Well, I appreciate when you get up to North Georgia. We want to have you in, and I'll be in touch with your campaign, see if we can't schedule to have another conversation soon. We tell every candidate, Senator, here at FetcherNews.com, FYN TV, we wish you well, and we thank you for your willingness to serve as the governor if elected. You have a nice day, sir.
Thanks, Brian. Same with you.
Okay, we're going to go to break real quick because we've got to get former homicide detective Rod Wheeler on the line. So we're just going to go to break long enough to get him on the line, then we'll come back as soon as we do, and we'll have former D.C. homicide detective Rod Wheeler on the line. Take us to break, Sam.